So it is absolutely wonderful to join you, Dutliff, for a coffee with the editor and in person. You've recently been appointed as the CEO of Thelo DB, so my official congratulations to you. And how's it going so far?
Philippa, yeah, thank you very much for joining us here at our offices. Much better in person. I think with COVID not behind us, but with all the challenges that we've experienced, we're looking for opportunities to meet in person. And not necessarily to take off the mask and to breach all the rules, but just to be able to actually to talk to somebody in person again. Lately, we've been confronted with the stereotype message of "you're on mute," and at least now we don't need to say to each other "you're on mute." You know, you're actually on camera. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a new start for me with Thelo DB. Luckily, my initials is also DB, so I find very comfort in the whole position of Thelo DB.
You come from the rail sector, so this is not it's not like you come from a different sector into this sector. You're well versed. You've got great experience in this sector as well. And I think just run us through some of your experience.
Philippa, yes, I was fortunate to grow up in a railway family. Both my dad and my grandfather used to work with the old South African railways and harbours, SAR&H at those days. I was also very fortunate to receive a bursary of the same SAR&H, and I've studied civil engineering from the University of Pretoria. Apart from having a bursary with the South African railways, my first introduction to railways was actually in my final year when I did my design project, which encompasses the design of beam on elastic support, and that actually represents, let's say, the railway track. In addition to that, I also did a construction project, let's say the economical implementation of a railway system underground. And I did that with Dr. Willie Eberson at the time at the University of Pretoria. I started my work career within Transnet after my degree in 1990 with Protocon. Those days, later better known as Transnet Capital Projects. And although I was fortunate to work both at the construction as well as the design division of Protocon, the bulk of my experience was more petrochemical, pipeline related. But as a young engineer, I always had a bit of an entrepreneurial view and approach. And as a result of that, very early in 1996, I actually started my own consultancy with the aim of focusing on the implementation of EPC infrastructure projects. In 2008, I was actually offered the position as managing director with R&H Railways. I think everybody in the South African industry, apart from knowing Transnet as custodian of rail within South Africa, they were also familiar with R&H, a well-established specialist consulting engineering entity that was established in 1940. And it was in this company that I have actually gained valuable additional experience, not only as manager, but also as railway engineer. I ultimately took full responsibility for project implementation as well as designs that was done within the company. But I think most important for me while at R&H was my introduction or implementation of railways as a system solution to the supply chain or the logistic requirements. I think traditionally there was always an approach of railways being a per-way infrastructure solution, and then to a large extent operations, signaling, power supply, OHDE, was added as additional elements. With my start at R&H, I think our business strategy and approach was from the beginning to actually say the railway system is an all-inclusive solution, combining all the different technical disciplines into one.
All right, so now you have joined Thelo DB, and I think it's quite important to maybe give our audience a breakdown of what makes up, because I know there's the leasing and then there's projects, and I would say it's a little complex, but maybe you can break it down for us.
Although I had a very good time with R&H, it was 13 valuable years, it was the right time, I think, to move on. Coincidentally, it happened together with COVID. I think COVID made us all realize that we are not really in control. It even made us realize that when you start thinking you are in control, that's actually when you are on your most dangerous. Together with the brilliant opportunity that I was offered with Thelo DB, actually made me realize that there is other areas where I can actually implement my experience, my skills, as well as my passion for infrastructure and railways. And that was within the bigger African continent. Thelo DB is an incorporated JV between Thelo Ventures, a rolling stock leasing as well as infrastructure, fully black-owned South African company, as well as Deutsche Bahn Engineering Consulting and Operations, German-owned company. Thelo DB is a unique venture or combination, combining international experience that is provided by Deutsche Bahn, but also African experience, relationships and trust that has been built by Thelo and Thelo as shareholder through the past years within the African continent. I think Thelo's main aim is to focus on railways in Africa. Our objective is to be the number one railway entity within Africa. At Thelo, we actually acknowledge that so many projects has been identified, so many feasibilities has been performed during the past decades, but very few of these projects has actually reached implementation or came to fruition. And what is the reason for this? I think we all realize that a lack of finance is definitely a large contributor, but this is very much based on the fact that there is quite a bit of political instability on the continent, but also there is a definite inability to implement and to operate. And this is actually the components that provide the financiers the long-term assurance that a project will be successful. These are the elements that Thelo DB has identified and which we actually incorporate within our business model to make project implementation and long-term sustainability through technical skills and trust a success for railways within Africa.
Is there anything, with you coming in as the new CEO, is there anything you're going to be changing? Are there projects or objectives that you're really going to be chasing?
What we have seen in Africa, apart from the challenges in terms of finance and implementation, Africa definitely has a slightly different approach than the European and the first world in terms of project execution. There's definitely a drive or a bigger drive towards EPC projects. In other words, construction companies that can come bring the finance, provide the solution, including of the design, and then implement the project. That being said, the final operations and maintenance of the project still remains in the balance. And without that being in place, it quite often happens that you don't have a successful railway project. So from Thelo DB's perspective, our focus is most definitely on the full value chain. We provide engineering, consulting and management services across the full value chain, starting at the project initiation, through the design, the implementation, as well as the maintenance and operations of the system post-implementation. In that regard, yes, our focus is Africa, focusing on railway infrastructure, which is valuable for Africa in the sense that it is one of the fastest growing continents in terms of population, as well as Africa has a large raw material resource base. So both those components actually provides valuable let's say, support for the growth of railway infrastructure. When we highlight that and we highlight the challenges, together with Thelo DB's solution that is based on skills and trust, we definitely are pursuing projects not only in South Africa, but across the continent, with the main aim of uplifting the continent economically, but also in terms of the people, the communities where we will be working, to uplift those people in terms of skills and capacitating them to actually to grow economically as well. We are currently pursuing a number of, let's say, railway corridor projects within the sub-Saharan African area, within the local South African market. I'm also glad to actually say that we've recently been awarded a contract together with our partner Pegasus by GMA that is actually for the implementation of the post-2026 concession on the Gautrain system. Thelo DB is the technical rail partner for Pegasus on that project. Being a transaction advisor project, the technical component is not so large. There's more, let's say, commercial, legal and financial inputs, but the technical feasibility always forms part of the final solution. So, yeah, I think that is a recent win within the local market that's also very positive for us.
That's a fantastic one. And that's just been announced.
Yes, yeah. I think about in the last month, the guys is already working on it, and they've already met with GMA and the relevant stakeholders, but yeah, that is a very positive one for us.
Very exciting. I think one of the roles that I'm quite keen to understand, Deutsche Bahn, and being, aside from a German rail operator, quite big into passenger service. What do you think is like the key relationship here? The key benefit of Deutsche Bahn being part of Thelo DB?
The key benefit of Deutsche Bahn is it is the largest rail operator in the world. They employ more than 330,000 people. Apart from that, they also have a substantial engineering and consulting division or operation, which comprises of about 5,600 engineering employees. And DB Engineering, Consulting and Operation, the latter I've just referred to, is actually the entity that is part shareholder within Thelo DB. Deutsche Bahn brings credibility. Deutsche Bahn brings experience, knowledge in terms of the rail system, not only in terms of the engineering, but as well as the operation, but also in terms of training. I think training is a very important component. Very seldom we have a scenario in South Africa where you can actually go to the university and say, I want to be trained as a railway engineer. You usually train as a technical engineer in a certain specialist field, and then you develop as a railway engineer working within the railway environment. Deutsche Bahn has the Railway Academy with large and extensive training programs which they offer within the railway sector. And that is actually that part of the business that we will definitely rely on heavily also. Once a certain railway system has been, let's say, developed, designed, implemented, to actually to include that training within the final operations and maintenance of such a system. Our objective from Thelo DB's perspective is not to bring in international skills, execute the project, and then afterwards pack our bags and then leave for Europe or the international environment again, but actually to really provide value and input to the local people within the continent. And at the end of the day, to create a system that can operate on its own with the initial support of a company that has actually all these years of experience and skills. So there is definitely a long-term objective, and that's why we say Railways for Africa, sustainable railway projects for the continent. And we believe that is what will not only make the continent flourish, but also provide a lot of brilliant opportunities for Thelo DB and for us then to be the #1 railway entity within the African continent.
So let's just take that and bring it back into the South African context. We have the opportunity for open access, which would be, I'm sure, for you guys exciting. In addition, we have PRASA, or Department of Transport, driving concessions for, or possible concessions for public transport, public rail transport. I think both of those would be exciting initiatives for Thelo DB.
If we focus on the South African environment, definitely Transnet, Freight Rail, PRASA Passenger Rail, both of them in a very precarious position currently, especially after COVID, and especially after the large scale of vandalism that the rail system has actually experienced. We are very excited. Excited not only because there is this knowing that something needs to happen, but actually because we can see that already things are really happening. From the President's perspective, announcing, as you rightfully say, the Open Access Initiative, very positive. Not only words, I really think from Transnet's management's perspective, we can really see that there's some real actions currently being taken to actually start more private sector participation. And that is very positive. PRASA passenger rail side, and with the recent announcements that's been made by the group CEO, Zolani Matthews, they are also really committed to reinstate the system. I think they also realize that the very important aspect of reinstating that system is the safety and security component. And although we've been dealing with safety and security over the past few years, personally I believe it was driven more from a private sector perspective. And although the private sector can actually add valuable inputs and contribution to the final solution, I'm of the view that safety and security within the rail system needs to be driven nationally, and it must actually come from the government. And I really think that that is something that will be on the table. Listening to the PRASA management, I really believe that that forms key and core of the final system upgrade. Transnet, yes, we've heard some discussions regarding some concessions on some of the corridors. We've seen the initiative in terms of the motor vehicle export via Kuga. But we've also seen that there was a number of branch lines that's been put out on concession. And initially, I don't think there was a big take from the industry. But where we find ourselves currently, I think with all the things coming together, the open access, the private sector participation, I really think that the environment is starting to be developed and to be created, that we can see valuable growth within the rail industry, and perhaps with some, and I must be careful how I word this, but with some separation in terms of infrastructure, rail management and rail operations. If there can be a positive separation between those three levels, then together with the open access and the private sector participation, I think we can see only positive things happening for the South African economy, which will actually add great value to our economic growth.